All right, welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. This time around, we're tackling a topic that honestly has me pretty fired up.
Oh, really? Why is that?
Well, it's this whole idea of risk and reward. I mean, it's kind of universal, right? You guys sent us some sources that look at it from both a ancient wisdom perspective and then also from a modern finance angle. It's a really cool combo.
Yeah, I see what you mean. It's not every day you get to bridge the gap between, say, biblical teachings and, Wall Street.
Exactly. And that's really our goal in this deep dive. To see what these sources, we're talking Ecclesiastes, Matthew, and then some Benjamin Graham, the OG investor, what they can teach us about how to navigate risk and reward in, well, pretty much any area of life. So, ready to dive in.
Let's do it. I'm curious to see what we uncover.
Okay, so let's start with that ancient wisdom angle, right? Ecclesiastes 11.1 day 2. You flag this passage, and it's got the super vivid image. Cast your bread upon the waters, and you will find it after many days. What's the takeaway there for us today? I mean, it sounds kind of poetic, but what's the practical message?
It is poetic, right? But there's definitely a practical core to it. Think of it like this. It's talking about investment and maybe even generosity, too. Like you're putting something out there, resources, effort, whatever, with the hope of getting a return down the line. And this is key, there's that acknowledgement that things are uncertain. The waters could be smooth sailing or they could get rough.
So, how does that ancient wisdom translate to, I don't know, our everyday decisions?
Well, that's where the next part of the passage comes in. It says, give a portion to 7 or even to 8, for you do not know what disaster may happen on earth. And that right there is a pretty early shout out to diversification. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, so to speak. Spread your resources, your efforts, because, well, life throws curveballs.
That's interesting. Diversification as an ancient risk management strategy. Makes sense. But you also pointed to a New Testament parable, the parable of the talents in Matthew. What does that bring into the conversation about risk and reward?
Right, the parable of the talents. This one adds another layer. So you've got this master who gives his servants different amounts of basically capital, these talents, and he expects them to use it wisely to make it grow. 2 of the servants invest it, take some risks, and generate returns. The third guy, though, he gets scared, and he just buries his talent, plays it totally safe.
And the master isn't too happy about that, right?
Not at all. He's actually furious. He praises the risk takers, those who made something of what they were given, and the servant who played it safe. He gets a serious scolding.
It's almost like the parable is saying that not taking any risks is a risk in itself.
Exactly. Like responsible stewardship isn't just about holding on to what you've got. It's also about making it grow, taking calculated chances to potentially benefit yourself and maybe even others down the line.
So if we put these two biblical perspectives together, what's the big picture lesson on risk?
I think it's that risk is just a natural part of life. The Bible isn't saying go wild, take every crazy risk you can find, but it's also not saying sit on your hands and be afraid of everything. It's about a balance. Being smart, thinking things through, diversifying to manage those downsides, but also being willing to step out, take calculated risks, because that's often how you see real growth.
Okay, that's a super interesting foundation. Now let's shift gears to the world of modern finance. You mentioned Benjamin Graham, the author of The Intelligent Investor. How does his work tie in with all this ancient wisdom?
It's wild, actually. Graham, writing in the mid-20th century, essentially lays out a framework for investing that echoes so much of what we see in those biblical texts. For example, his emphasis on diversification. It's almost a direct echo of that give a portion to 7 or even to 8 advice from Ecclesiastes.
Wow. So walk us through that connection. How does Graham see diversification playing out in modern investing?
He's adamant about it. It's not just a nice to have to maybe bump up your returns a bit. It's fundamental to managing risk. Spread your investments across different types of assets, different industries. Don't put all your faith in one company or one sector. Because, just like that ancient wisdom warns, who knows what disaster might strike? Diversification helps you weather those storms.
It's like building a financial safety net.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And Graham's logic for this ties into another idea we see in Ecclesiastes, that idea that the future is uncertain. Graham's whole thing is that you can't really predict the market in the short term. So trying to time it, to pick the next hot stock, that's basically gambling. Diversification, on the other hand, it's about acknowledging that uncertainty, protecting yourself from those big swings by spreading the risk. He's not saying never take risks. He's saying understand them, manage them, don't be reckless.
That makes sense. And it brings up a question that I'm sure a lot of our listeners are thinking about. Does the Bible actually say we should avoid all risk?
Good question. And based on what we've looked at, I think it's safe to say no. I mean, Ecclesiastes encourages diversification, right? Which implies you're going to take some risks. And that parable of the talents, it straight up praises those who took risks and made those talents grow. It's not about avoidance. It's about wisdom. It's about being cautious, sure, but not letting fear paralyze you.
Okay, so then another question pops up. How do we apply that biblical wisdom to managing risk in, say, our investments today? Like that 7 or 8 from Ecclesiastes, it feels a bit abstract when you're looking at a 401k or the stock market.
Yeah, good point. Those specific numbers, I think, they're more about conveying the principle of diversification, not necessarily a hard and fast rule. The key is to think broadly. So in today's world, diversification means spreading your investments across different types of assets, stocks, bonds, real estate, maybe even other things. And even within those categories, spread it out further. Different industries, different geographic locations. Don't put all your stock literally in one company or one part of the world.
And I guess that biblical emphasis on prudence, that plays into it too, right? Like, do your research, understand the risks involved before you jump into anything.
Absolutely. It's not just about throwing darts at a board.
Hmm.
Be thoughtful. Make informed decisions.
Okay, so we've talked about diversification, the biblical take on risk. Another biggie in this whole conversation is that relationship between risk and reward. What do our sources say about that connection?
Both the Bible and, modern financial theory agree on this. Generally speaking, the higher the risk you take, the higher the potential reward. But also, the higher the potential for loss. We see that in the parable of the talents, right? Those servants who really went for it, they saw the biggest returns. But they also took the biggest risk.
And in the financial world.
Same idea. Think about stocks, for example.
Mm.
They have the potential for big gains, but they can also be super volatile. You could lose money. Bonds, on the other hand, they're generally safer, more stable, but they don't offer the same potential for those huge returns.
Mm.
So it's about finding that balance, right? Knowing what you're comfortable with.
And diversifying to spread that risk.
Exactly.
This has been super insightful, but I want to throw out one last question that I think might be on a lot of people's minds. Can you really be a good steward of your resources, your money, your time, your talents, while also taking risks? Sometimes it feels like those two ideas clash.
That's a common concern, for sure. But here's the thing. Being a good steward isn't just about protecting what you have. It's also about making the most of it, making it grow.
Yeah.
And often, that means taking some risks.
Like those servants in the parable who invested the talents and saw them multiply.
Right. But, and this is super important, the risks they took were calculated.
Yeah.
They weren't just throwing money around blindly. And they were in it for the long haul.
So it's about being thoughtful, strategic, and having a long-term vision.
Exactly.
Okay, so for everyone listening, let's break down those key takeaways from this deep dive. What are the big things to remember when it comes to navigating this whole risk and reward thing?
First and foremost, diversification is your friend. We saw that in Ecclesiastes. We saw in Graham's work. Spreading the risk, not putting all your eggs in one basket, it's timeless wisdom.
Absolutely. What else?
Second, don't be afraid to take risks, but be smart about it. Do your research. Understand the potential downsides. Remember, risk is often the path to growth.
What else should we keep in mind?
Patience is key. Don't expect overnight success. Those returns, they often take time. That's something else we see in Ecclesiastes. After many days, you will find it again. Think long-term.
And lastly?
Prudence, wisdom. Don't be reckless. Don't get swept up in the hype. Think things through. Make informed decisions.
I like that. So how about we tie all this to some real-world examples, just to make it really concrete?
Okay, sure. Take the stock market. It's risky, right? Goes up, goes down. You never know what's going to happen next. But the common advice you hear, diversify your portfolio. Hold stocks from different sectors, maybe throw in some bonds for stability. That's essentially applying that ancient wisdom of not putting all your bread in one place.
Makes sense. What about, starting a business? That's a huge risk.
Huge risk, huge potential reward. And what do successful venture capitalists do? They invest in multiple startups, knowing that many will fail. But the hope is that a few will hit it big and make up for those losses. Again, it's about spreading the risk, not betting everything on a single venture.
So that ancient wisdom applies even in the high-stakes world of startups and investing.
Oh, absolutely. And even in something like real estate. Imagine you're investing in property. A smart strategy. Don't buy all your properties in the same city or even the same type of property. Spread it out. Residential, commercial, different locations. It protects you if one market takes a downturn or if something happens to a specific property.
It's amazing how this thread of understanding about risk and reward runs through so many different areas of life.
It really is.
So as we wrap up, what's the big takeaway you want our listeners to walk away with?
This whole idea of risk and reward, it's not a new concept. People have been grappling with it for centuries. And the wisdom we find in those ancient texts, it's incredibly relevant even today. Diversify, be willing to take calculated risks, be patient, be prudent. Those are the keys to navigating this journey.
And on that note, here's something for everyone to chew on. As you go about your week, think about how you're approaching risk and reward in your own life. Are you taking enough calculated risks? Are you being too cautious, missing out on potential growth? Or are you being reckless, taking on more risk than you can handle? It's worth reflecting on.
Absolutely.
All right, well, that's a wrap for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll catch you in the next one.